It's one of those things where it shouldn't be a political subject, because this is something that affects all of us, and you know, all we're trying to do is make sure that humanity lives on. Really, you'd think that it would be something everyone would just agree on, and that politics couldn't even come into something that important. But unfortunately, because of the way the world works and the way corporations and businesses work and all of that, and just, it's not as simple as that. That I've never studied marine biology, that I don't work for any companies that involve either food or animals at all, neither of the two. So this, I have no reason to have any sort of agenda in this. I only have my own opinions. I am very unqualified. I really don't know anything other than what I read about and what I watch, and you know, it's hard to know what the truth is as an ordinary person looking at this, because there are industries that do have a reason to have an agenda. So yeah, once again, I do want to throw in the disclaimer that I really don't know anything about this subject other than what I have chosen to look for. Again, I never studied it in school, never studied it at uni. I've never worked in any kind of job that involves any information to do with this. This is just all from my own brain. Okay, so I've been kind of like rewatching it again, because I always miss bits. I'm not going to talk about everything in here, but I want to talk about the bits where I actually have ideas. I don't really want to talk about the obvious stuff, like you shouldn't kill whales and dolphins to eat or put in parks, because we all know that and it's obvious that should be happening. I'm gonna go talk about the things that are more complicated. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is like there's all these fish that are caught up in the nets, and they're not targets, they're just the bycatch. So I did actually do my own research, and it turns out some of the statistics in this documentary were a bit manipulated. Like, they did exaggerate the amount of fish that were bycatch. They exaggerated quite a bit. Well, according to my further research, how accurate that is, who knows. There did definitely seem to be some bias in the documentary. The overall documentary left you with the impression that it's impossible to have sustainable fishing industries, and that the only way to be ethical is to not eat fish at all. And one of the points that they kind of come out with at the end is, have we even asked, you know, if fish actually have feelings and all this? Can they feel pain? And then they were talking about some studies proving they can feel pain, and that they likely understand what's happening and what's going on. And at that point I kind of felt a bit tricked, because I got this sense that this is definitely coming from the perspective, from that vegan perspective where they don't want any harm done to animals, and not necessarily a perspective of the perspective that some other people might come from, where they want to do what's right for the environment so that the ocean's not completely destroyed, and so that we don't become extinct, because that's the reality of it. If the ocean's destroyed, then we're destroyed, really. So there's people coming from that angle, and then there's the vegan element, which is not just about us and about the overall health of the planet. It's about those things too, but it's also about the actual animal cruelty. And the problem with that is that even if there is a way of carrying on with this and, you know, making a world that is livable for us, they're still not going to be satisfied with that, because their result is to stop all kinds of animal cruelty and consumption of animal products. So they're not going to just stop at that. So it did leave you with that feeling of they're going to highlight the very real problems out there, because there are a lot of problems, clearly there is, but they're also not going to offer as many solutions that don't involve just quitting eating fish altogether, if that makes sense. When it comes to like animal rights and can fish feel things, that's a very philosophical question, and that's not something that it's not something I like to cover too much, because at the end of the day we could argue that other animals, killing other animals is cruel for them. You know, what's the difference? Does that mean we should ban those animals doing that? But then we need those animals to do that, or else the ecosystem gets messed up. So it's sort of like, it's this thing that should we hold ourselves to a much higher standard than other animals, and if we have to do that, isn't that just reaffirming the idea that we're different to them and go by different rules? I don't know. To me, that's a very philosophical question that I don't have the answers to. But it's got that very Netflix style of creating villains, like Netflix documentaries. They're very entertaining, and they are very addictive, and they keep you gripped, they keep you watching, and that's why I like them. But part of the reason why they are so intriguing is because I feel like Netflix is really, really good at creating documentaries with villains and creating like a little sinister vibe. Like they're good at making people look sinister and shady. Think of the Tiger King. The whole nation's convinced Carole Baskin actually killed her husband, but honestly we really don't have much evidence to go by on that. We really don't have much proof of that. It's the way Netflix has sort of framed her to look a certain type of way that gives us that impression, but we really don't know. And they are clever with that, and I've noticed, I watched Cowspiracy, and it was actually that one that made me feel even more this way about Seaspiracy, because in both of them, every time they went to go see some charity organisation, every time they went to go interview somebody, they all reacted in the same weird, shady way, like not answering questions properly, and weird expressions on their faces, like they felt uncomfortable or scared. And I don't doubt that people haven't been paid off and told to keep quiet about things. I think that's very believable. I mean, anything to do with the meat or fishing industry, like, come on, it's big money. Think about all the restaurants, you know, that sell meat and fish. Think about all the retailers, all the little individual products, ready meals, your fish and chip takeouts. There's thousands and thousands just in where I live, just within my local area. There's tons of these. Like, imagine how many businesses would go bust. Like, imagine how many people would lose their jobs. It would destroy like so much. So it doesn't really surprise me at all that charity organisations would want to keep quiet about the harm that these industries may be causing to the environment. It doesn't come as a shock to me at all. But it's also very easy to frame someone in a way that makes them look like they're being more shady than what they actually are. Really, I mean, that could have just been them thinking, like, how do I word this in a way that won't get me in trouble? It could be them. It could be simply that the statistics he's come out with genuinely weren't that accurate, or that they didn't know about them, which they should do if that's their area of expertise. But he said a lot of people didn't respond to his offers, and I won't lie and say that it's not shady, but at the same time, it is easy to frame someone in a certain type of way, you know, make everything about this seem sinister and shady and dodgy, and you know, everyone's going to be like, they're going to start building up even more with their own imaginations with that information, and it's a very clever way of like villainizing a whole group of people, especially like when they start talking about people being thrown overboard and stuff. Again, I'm not denying this. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm not saying it didn't happen for corrupt reasons within the fishing industry. I'm not saying that it didn't. But, you know, they've got their agenda, and they will use what information they can. And when you think there's all these millions of ships out there, are all of them dodgy? Now that I've got my views on why I think it is slightly propaganda-ish out of the way, I want to talk about the bits that I believe are real and a genuine serious concern that we should be looking more into. There was some mention that 45% of all plastic in the seas is fishing nets, and you know, we all remember when plastic straws got banned. Straws had been banned for the most part, and it turns out they were like a really small amount, something like 1% or 1.5% or something like that. I can't remember the exact statistic, but there was something like that in the ocean, so really a small amount in comparison. But when you think of it like that, you know, I guess it's easier to like get people thinking about the plastic straws because there's been some really like emotive imagery of like sea turtles with straws stuck in them, and it's very upsetting to see those images, so it's much easier to get people on board with it. But in reality, fishing is killing way more, and if it's true that most of the plastic is coming from the nets, you know, that is a big problem. And it just goes to show we're really not focusing and prioritising the things that actually matter. Something else that was a real big issue was bottom trawling, which, that sounds funny when I say it like that, but basically it's like damage to the seabed when they get the nets and they bulldoze and destroy all the life down below, and I don't even know why that's allowed to happen. I feel like it's lazy and unnecessary to be destroying wildlife in these ways. Like, there must be other ways, and I think I'm going to talk about some of the ways that I think that we could resolve this problem or make it better at the end of the video. And of course I'm no expert, so you know, someone could come along and debunk everything I said and say it's impossible, but I still do think that we could do a lot more to help sea life and to help the oceans than what we're doing right now. And I don't think it's impossible to live with seafood and fishing. I don't think it's impossible. I think if we were clever about it and if we invested as much money into the ocean as what we do into space and NASA, then, you know, I think we would find solutions. One of the most concerning statistics about all of this, which they mentioned in it and it's also on Wikipedia as well, is that they've predicted, following a 4-year study in November 2006, that with the way trends are going, the world may run out of wild-caught seafood by 2048. I don't think in the documentary it mentions the fact that they're wild-caught though, so you know, that's where it can be a little bit manipulative, but it's still, despite their like little manipulations, that's still extremely concerning. All of the ocean is going to eventually become just, well, all the ocean that we can access is just going to end up becoming like what most land is like now, just animals existing for human consumption, not just for their own existence. I wanted to kind of talk about sustainable fishing. One of the first ways that I think we could do that is investments in underwater cameras or underwater sensors. And obviously we already have underwater cameras, but I'm guessing most of them probably can't take the pressure of the ocean when it goes that deep. But I think that would be worth investing in. I mean, after all, we have cameras in space. If we can get a camera out on a satellite in space, why the hell can't we just put it in the ocean? Like, I don't get why no one's looking into this. You know, that would be a way of doing it, because then we could look out for any kind of animals that they don't want to catch, or they can, if the net's going to get caught on something and end up going underwater, they can get it back easier because they can see where it's gone, or they can stop it ripping on things. So, you know, that's something worth considering. Another thing to consider is different types of net. Like, why does it have to be made out of plastic? Surely there's other materials. I mean, I don't know how good ropes are, but I mean, surely back in the day they didn't use plastic. I mean, plastic's fairly modern, isn't it? I mean, people have fished since time began. What did they use? Like, they must have used something. I know it's different when it's commercial because it's on a much bigger scale, but there must be ways of making safe nets that don't kill animals, or that they can let them go if they're not the right kind of animal. Surely there must be a way of doing that. Something that I thought of, which is probably going to sound funny, but I thought of like the idea of having sonar, which mimics like dolphin language or whale language, so that they understand that there's like a warning for them to get away if the ship makes a sound. Of course, I know that would probably complicate their own communication systems, and it could cause more issues than it solves. Like, I was just having a little joke with my sister about how instead of doing a warning call, the ship might end up doing a mating call and get tipped over. I was just being silly, but yeah. I'm not saying that's possible, it's probably not, but it was just a thought I had. Of course, one of the biggest things, the best thing we could do is just do it a lot less. And they make out like, oh, there's no way all these humans could cope, would all get the right amount of resources, if, you know what I mean, if they still want to eat this and there's less fishing. But I don't agree with that. I think whenever you go to a supermarket, there's always tons of food that goes to waste. Tons of food goes to waste. Think about it. We actually buy and we actually have access to a lot more than we ever need. We don't need that much meat. We don't need that much fish. And so much of it gets thrown out anyway. So why we don't need to be dishing on that scale, or, you know, when it comes to animals having this many cows, and we actually don't need to, like, I don't think we do. And when you think, a lot of people are quite greedy as well, like they eat way more than they need. In all honesty, if I went to a supermarket and the product that I wanted wasn't there, I would just buy an alternative product or come back another day, or just eat less of it. I don't get why that's hard. Like, there are ways you can do things, like freeze things, dry things out, use all the salt. There's ways to make things last so that you don't eat as much. Really, we're very pampered, and we have more than we need. Like, if we go to the shop, we know what we need is most likely going to be there. So when you think about it, we don't need to be fishing on this scale that's damaging the ocean. We really don't. If they did it less, I don't think they would make a loss. I really don't. I mean, I guess I don't know all the ins and outs of how it works, because obviously I'm guessing they sell a batch to this company and then to that. But then all these companies and businesses need to come together on a serious level and actually discuss this with each other. How can we be more sustainable? And they need to just stop doing the easy thing, and they need to do the right thing. I mean, you've got to think long term. Like, yeah, sure, your business might be booming right now, but if we're gonna have real serious problems with the ocean in the future, then business might go bust anyway if they all go extinct, you know what I mean? To me, I just think it's all about being creative, using your imagination, thinking of new ways to solve the problem, because just running away from the problem won't help. It'll just make it gradually get worse. It's always better to get onto something before it's too late, rather than end up having to give up everything, which is what will happen if we just keep leaving things how they are. Like, I don't want to give up eating fish. Seafood's one of my favourite foods. I don't want to give it up, but if things don't improve, I'm gonna end up having to, like, eat algae and stuff to get my omega-3, and that's gonna be the way I'll have to go forward, because I don't think, if it carries on the way it is, I don't think I could rationalise eating seafood anymore. This is where I want to get to my final point, where I feel like this documentary ends up turning on the consumer in the end. Like, it acknowledges that there's a lot of problem with the industry. It does it to a point where it's almost like making them into caricatures of the big bad boss, the mafia boss, you know what I mean? It takes it to that level, and then at the end of it turns around and basically tells the consumer that we just need to stop eating fish, and that there's no ethical way to eat fish, and that's the only way we can resolve this issue. And I'm just thinking, in all honesty, I'm not saying consumers have no power. If everybody refused to eat it, they would have to act on it. But the problem with that is that a lot of people are not even going to watch the documentary, so they're not going to stop eating it. And some people might see it and either not believe it or not even care. Like, there's a lot of people in the world that actually really don't care, because they see what happens in the long-term future as something that won't affect them, and therefore they just don't care. So we can't be relying on us all the time, the people at the bottom, the people with the least money and power, when it's the people at the top, in reality, that they're the ones that are in control of this, not us. And I get the whole documentary is showing you how hard it is to even get in touch with the charities, never mind the owners of the companies and the corrupt individuals involved. So, I mean, I get it, it's not easy for anybody to address people that rich and powerful and that protected. So I get it. So really what it comes down to is, why aren't the people in power doing more? We can only buy what we have access to. I can't grow a farm. Like, people in flats and crowded cities full of lots of people with limited land. You can't get land in the UK unless you're rich. That's not a thing. The best you can get is a garden. I don't even have that. I don't even have a garden. There's a bit of land over the road that I don't own. I guess I could, you know what I mean? Like, and then to have to rear a farm when we've got jobs that involve being in the house or being in an office or wherever. We've got to go somewhere. We don't have time to rear a farm. And it's just not realistic. We can only buy what's in the supermarkets, and how can we regulate everything that gets put in there when we're not the ones making the rules? We can't go on and see what's going on in these companies. We can't be in all these different places sorting everything out. We can't even rely on the food labels we look at, since this documentary has shown us, you know, with the whole dolphin safe thing. The dolphins were not actually safe. We don't even know, even going by our labels, even if we're paying more for stuff, we don't 100% know it's actually more ethical. We are extremely powerless, and as privileged as we are to be able to buy all these wonderful products, we're kind of like dogs. Like, you know how dogs, we'll make sure their life is really happy. We'll give them everything they want, their favourite food, a comfortable place to sleep. We'll give them lots of love and attention and make them feel special. Make sure that they die with dignity. We give them everything, right? But they're still powerless, despite the fact that they are privileged because they're pampered and get access to all these resources. They're still at the mercy of the people that hand them those resources. They're still unable to change their environment. They're still unable to control where the things that are placed into their life come from. And we're the same. We might feel like we're free and we've got more power than what we do, but we don't. I hope I haven't come too hard on the vegans in this one, because like, I do actually respect your cause. I think it's very noble to care about animals. I think there's a lot of grey areas, a lot of complications, but overall veganism is good for the planet, a lot better for the planet and good for animals. Do I think it's necessarily good for us? I don't know, but I do think it is a good cause, and I think vegans get a lot of hate that they don't deserve. Do I think that the documentary did have a lot of propaganda in it? Yeah, there were like little tweaks with statistics and a lot of things were said, but we didn't really have a lot of proof that they were true, and they definitely had their own angle. They were definitely highlighting the things wrong, which is what you should do anyway, because they're the things you need to change, not. But I feel like they only had that one example of when it was done right, and there must be more than one example. I'm sure must be done right more than just once. And then it kind of finished off with that whole, well, fish have feelings anyway, so even if we could do this, you still shouldn't, you know what I mean? It had that kind of vibe. Yeah, I think it did have a little propaganda in it, but it was still overall very informative, and I think I'm glad that it exists because it highlighted so many important issues that we need to sort out, and we don't have time for corruption and politics and greed and all this anymore. We don't have time for it anymore. Are we really gonna put profit before our actual existence?